From the street, it looked like a typical moving day at the shore, with a rental truck and two kids racing through the sand. That illusion shattered when my neighbor texted me that my mother was bragging about finally moving into the family beach house. I watched my cousin shove her sofa through my front door, assuming I would just roll over like always. She had no idea the police already knew my name and a locksmith was on his way. My name is Naomi Hunt, and at 33 years old, I thought I had finally built walls high enough to keep the chaos of my upbringing at bay. I was wrong. The day my boundaries were bulldozed began like any other humid Tuesday in late August. I was leaving the Copperline Harbor Development Office, where I had spent 10 hours negotiating lease terms for a new mixed-use complex downtown. My brain felt like it had been run through a shredder. All I wanted was the 30-minute drive down the coast to Bay Ridge, the silence of my cottage at Sable Point Shore, and a glass of cheap Pinot Grigio on my back deck. I was just turning the key in the ignition of my sedan when my phone buzzed against the center console. The screen lit up with the name Caroline Hensley. Caroline was my neighbor, a retired schoolteacher with a penchant for gardening and keeping a watchful eye on the neighborhood. She was the kind of woman who baked blueberry muffins when you moved in and knew exactly which trash pickup days were delayed for holidays. She never called just to chat. I picked up, pinning the phone between my ear and shoulder as I reversed out of the parking spot. "Hi, Caroline," I said, trying to inject some cheer into my voice. "Everything okay?" "Naomi, honey." Caroline's voice was tight, vibrating with a nervous energy that made my stomach turn over. "Are you aware there is a moving truck backed up onto your lawn?" I hit the brakes, my car jerking to a halt in the middle of the empty lot. "Excuse me? A delivery truck?" "No, dear. A moving truck. One of those big rentals," Caroline whispered, as if she were hiding behind her curtains. "And your mother is here. She is standing by the hydrangeas telling the delivery men, well, they look like day laborers. Actually, she is telling them to be careful with the sectional because it needs to fit in the living room." My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. "My mother is there? She is telling anyone who will listen that she is finally moving into the family beach house," Caroline said, her voice dropping even lower. "I told her I thought you were at work, and she just laughed. She said, 'Oh, Naomi knows better than to make us wait.' Naomi, I don't want to overstep, but she has keys in her hand." A cold, heavy stone formed in my gut. It wasn't just dread. It was a sickeningly familiar sensation of gravity shifting, the way the floor used to tilt whenever my mother decided reality was going to be different that day. "I am on my way," I told Caroline. "Please, just stay inside. Don't engage with them." "Drive safe, honey," she said, and the line went dead. The drive to Sable Point Shore usually took half an hour, but I made it in 20 minutes. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that clashed with the serene coastal scenery blurring past my windows. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just dropping off some old furniture they wanted me to store. Maybe Ruth was having a manic episode and thought she was helping me redecorate. But deep down, I knew. I knew the specific flavor of my family's audacity. When I turned onto the gravel lane that led to my cottage, the first thing I saw was the truck. It was a 20-foot box truck, hulking and dirty. Its back ramp extended right onto my crushed shell walkway. And there was the tableau, exactly as Caroline had described, but worse. My mother, Ruth Cole, stood in the center of my yard like a general on a battlefield. She was wearing a floral tunic and white capris, gesturing wildly at the front door. My cousin Lena Morrow, 3 years older than me and a lifetime more chaotic, was struggling up the porch steps with a cardboard box that looked ready to burst. And then there were the children. Lena's kids, 8-year-old Tyler and 6-year-old Ava, were sprinting in circles around the front yard, shrieking with delight. Ava was dragging a plastic beach shovel through my meticulously weeded flower bed. I pulled my car into the driveway, blocking the exit path of the moving truck. I slammed the door and marched toward them, my heels sinking slightly into the soft ground. Ruth spotted me and threw her hands up, her face splitting into a wide, beaming smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Naomi, perfect timing," she shouted over the sound of the ocean and the idling truck. "Park behind the truck, sweetheart. We left the heavy boxes for you. Lena's back is acting up again." She said it with such casual confidence, such utter lack of shame, that I stopped dead in my tracks 10 feet away from her. She spoke as if I were late to my own execution. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "What is going on? What is this truck doing here?" Ruth waved a dismissive hand, the silver bangles on her wrist clinking together. "Don't look so sour. We are moving in. I told you last month Lena was having trouble with her landlord. Well, we decided it was time to stop throwing money away on rent when we have perfectly good family property sitting here half empty." Lena appeared at the top of the stairs, wiping sweat from her forehead. She smirked down at me, that familiar expression of triumph she had worn since we were teenagers. "Finally putting this place to good use," Lena called out. "Kids, look, Aunt Naomi is home. Tell her thank you for the house." Tyler stopped running and looked at me, confused. "Mom said it's our house now." The air left my lungs. I looked back at my mother. "This is not family property. Mom, this is my house. My name is on the deed. My name is on the mortgage. I bought this." Ruth's smile faltered, replaced by a look of sharp irritation. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so the movers wouldn't hear, though she clearly didn't care if the neighbors did. "Naomi, don't start with this selfish nonsense. Your father and I gave you $3,000 for the deposit on this place. $3,000. Do you know how much money that was for us?" "That was 4 years ago," I said, fighting to keep my volume level. "The down payment was $40,000. I paid $37,000 of it. I have paid every single mortgage payment, every property tax bill, every insurance premium. You gave me $3,000 as a gift. Mom, you wrote gift on the check." "Technicalities," Lena scoffed from the porch. She dropped the box she was holding with a heavy thud. "Grandpa left that money for the family. You just manipulated him into signing it over to you. It is family money. Naomi, that makes this a family house." "Lena needs stability," Ruth interjected, stepping between me and the porch as if guarding it. "She is a single mother doing her best. You live here all alone in a 3-bedroom house. It is greedy, Naomi. It is sinful to have all this space while your sister, cousin, but she is like a sister to you, is struggling." "She is not struggling," I snapped, the anger finally piercing through the shock. "She got evicted because she stopped paying rent to buy a new car. I saw the Facebook posts. Lena." "You stalker," Lena yelled. "You don't know my life. The world is hard on me, okay? Not everyone gets a cushy office job and forgets where they came from." "I worked 3 jobs in college," I said, my voice rising. "I didn't forget anything. I built this. This is mine." Ruth grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug into my bicep, hard. "Stop it. You are embarrassing us. Look at the neighbors watching. Now, you are going to open that garage door so we can put the overflow in there. And you are going to help your sister settle in. We can discuss the rent contributions later, once Lena gets on her feet." "Rent contributions?" I laughed. A harsh, jagged sound. "You mean 0? Just like the time you borrowed money for the electric bill and never paid me back? Just like the time you needed a cosigner for the car Lena wrecked?" "The past is the past," Ruth hissed. "Family helps family. We are moving in. Naomi, that is final. Now be a good daughter and move your car." At that moment, Lena kicked a box across the porch to make room for another one. It was a heavy plastic bin labeled Lena's Dishes. It slammed into the cedar shake siding of my house, the siding I had paid $5,000 to replace just last spring after a storm. The corner of the bin gouged a deep, white scratch into the gray paint. Thwack! That sound, that dull, hollow impact against the structure of my sanctuary, it broke something inside me. For 33 years, I had played the role of the fixer, the responsible one, the one who absorbed the chaos so the family boat wouldn't capsize. I had swallowed my anger when they missed my college graduation because Lena had a breakup. I had smiled when they made fun of my career, I had let them rewrite history because it was easier than fighting a war I was outnumbered in. But this house was different. This house was the only thing on earth that was just mine. I looked at the scratch on the wall. I looked at Ruth's tightening grip on my arm. I looked at Lena's smug face, so certain that I would fold, just like I always did. The panic in my chest didn't vanish, but it froze. It crystallized into something sharp and cold and incredibly heavy. "Okay," I said softly. Ruth's grip relaxed. She smiled, patting my arm. "There, see? Was that so hard? I knew you would come to your senses." "I just need to go inside for a minute," I said, my voice flat. "I need to use the bathroom. Then I will figure out the car situation." "Go ahead," Ruth said, waving me off as she turned back to the movers. "Don't take too long. We need to get the bed set up before dark." I walked up the stairs. I didn't look at Lena as I passed her. I stepped over the toys scattered on my welcome mat. I unlocked my front door, the key sliding in smoothly. The air inside was cool and smelled of lemon polish and sea salt. It was quiet. It was my space. I stepped inside. I turned around. Lena was reaching for the door handle, about to follow me in with a box of clothes. I slammed the door in her face. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I engaged the secondary security latch I had installed myself. Click. "Hey!" Lena shouted from the other side, muffling through the wood. "What the hell? Open the door!" I backed away, my legs suddenly trembling so violently I could barely stand. I leaned my back against the foyer wall and slid down until I was sitting on the hardwood floor. Outside, the shouting started. Ruth's voice joined Lena's, a chorus of outrage rising over the sound of the ocean. My hands were shaking as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my boyfriend. I swiped through my contacts until I found the number I had saved years ago, hoping I would never have to use it against my own blood. "Police, Bay Ridge, non-emergency." I pressed call and held the phone to my ear, closing my eyes as the first tear leaked out. "Bay Ridge Police Department, how can I help you?" the dispatcher asked. "My name is Naomi Hunt," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I am at 412 Ocean Drive. There are people trying to force entry into my home. I need an officer, please." The silence inside the hallway was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the oxygen right out of my lungs. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, listening to the muffled, angry murmurs on the other side, and I realized that this moment had been 30 years in the making. This invasion was not a sudden, spontaneous event. It was the final, inevitable conclusion to the script my family had been writing since I was old enough to tie my own shoes. We did not grow up near the water. The ocean was a luxury. A day trip we took once a summer with a cooler full of bologna sandwiches and generic soda. We lived 30 miles inland in a neighborhood defined by chain-link fences and the persistent hum of the interstate. In that house, the roles were assigned early, cast in iron and impossible to break. Lena was the chaos, and I was the containment strategy. My cousin Lena came to live with us when she was 5. After her own mother, my father's sister, vanished into a haze of addiction that she never found her way out of. You would think this tragedy would make my parents strict, eager to steer Lena onto a safer path. Instead, it made them paralyzed by guilt. They treated Lena like a glass doll that had already been dropped once. They were terrified that any discipline, any expectation, would shatter her completely. So, Lena became the victim of the universe. When she failed a math test, it was because the teacher disliked her. When she got caught shoplifting lip gloss at the drugstore, it was a cry for help that needed understanding, not punishment. When she dropped out of community college 3 weeks into her first semester because the bus schedule was too confusing, my father, Gerald, sat at the kitchen table and sighed that the world was just too complicated for a spirit as fragile as hers. I, on the other hand, was the sturdy one, the resilient one. I was the child who did not need worrying about, which is a lonely thing to be. While Lena was creating tornadoes, I was following behind her with a broom and dustpan. I started working the day I turned 16, bagging groceries at the local supermarket. I saved every quarter. hiding my cash in a hollowed-out biology textbook because I learned early on that money left on the dresser had a way of disappearing into Lena's pockets. I worked my way through high school, earning the grades that Lena couldn't be bothered to study for. I filled out my own financial aid forms. I secured my own scholarships during college. While my peers were going to fraternity parties or spring break trips, I was pulling double shifts as a barista, smelling permanently of stale espresso and burnt milk. I would come home at 2 in the morning, exhausted, only to wake up 4 hours later for an 8 o'clock lecture. Whenever I complained, whenever I asked why Lena got to sleep in while I ground myself to dust, my mother would give me that sad, soft look and say the words that became the soundtrack of my youth. "You are the responsible one. Naomi, you are strong. You understand that we have to help those who cannot help themselves." It was a compliment designed to shut me up. It was a trap. I remember the first time the financial abuse became explicit. I was a junior in college, living on a diet of ramen noodles and sheer willpower. My father's hours at the plant had been cut, and the household economy was in free fall. Ruth called me on a Tuesday night, her voice trembling. They were going to cut off the power. She said, "Just a temporary setback. Could I send $200? Just until Dad got his overtime back." I had $300 to my name, meant for my own rent, but I was the responsible one. I was the one who understood. So I sent the money. The overtime eventually returned. The money never did. When I gently asked about it 6 months later, Ruth looked at me with genuine hurt in her eyes. She asked how I could be so petty as to count pennies with my own parents when I had a bright future ahead of me and they were struggling to keep the lights on. I learned then that loaning money to family was actually just giving it away, and asking for it back was an act of betrayal. The dynamic only solidified when Lena started having children. Tyler and Ava were sweet kids, innocent bystanders in the wreckage of their mother's life, but they were immediately weaponized. Lena moved back in with my parents permanently after Tyler was born, and suddenly, every boundary I tried to set was framed as an attack on the children. If I didn't want to drive 2 hours to babysit on a Friday night because I had a work deadline, I didn't care about my nephew. If I refused to buy the expensive video game console Lena promised Tyler for Christmas, I was the rich, cold auntie breaking a little boy's heart. The children became emotional shields. You couldn't say no to Lena without saying no to the kids. And who creates a monster who says no to children? I escaped physically, but never emotionally. I built a career at Copperline Harbor Development through grit and sleepless nights. I lived in a studio apartment that was little more than a closet, drove a car with a rattling muffler, and skipped vacations for a decade. I had one goal, one singular, obsession-fueled dream. I wanted a house by the water. I wanted to wake up and hear the ocean, a sound that represented everything my childhood was not. Calm, consistent, and vast enough to drown out the noise of my family. The turning point, or what should have been the turning point, came 3 years ago when my grandfather passed away. He was a quiet man who had watched the family dynamics with a sharp, discerning eye. When his will was read, the family was shocked. He left nothing to my parents. Claiming he had supported them enough during his life, he left nothing to Lena. He left a modest sum, $45,000, entirely to me. Included with the check was a handwritten letter, the ink shaky, but the message clear. "For Naomi," it read, "because you are the only one who will use this to build something. Use this to create something that is yours alone. Do not share it. Do not apologize for it." I cried when I read it. I felt seen for the first time in my life. I used that money immediately. I found the cottage at Sable Point Shore. It was a fixer-upper, neglected and outdated, but it was on the water. It was mine. I put down the deposit, signed the 30-year mortgage that terrified me, and emptied my savings account to cover the closing costs. That was when the trap sprung again, subtle and insidious. On the day I signed the final papers, Ruth handed me a check for $3,000. She pressed it into my hand with a teary smile. "Here," she had said, "your father and I scraped this together. We know it isn't much compared to what Grandpa left you, But we want to contribute. We want to be part of this milestone. At the time, I was so high on the adrenaline of homeownership that I let my guard down. I thought it was a kindness. I thought they were finally proud of me. I didn't see it for what it was. A purchase of shares, a stake in the claim. I deposited the check. I used it to buy appliances, a refrigerator and a washer-dryer set. Almost immediately, the language changed. At Sunday dinners, Lena would make snide comments while feeding Ava. "Must be nice to have a whole house to yourself," she would say, stabbing a potato with her fork. "So much wasted space, 2 bedrooms for one person." Meanwhile, the kids are sharing a room with me. I would laugh it off, uncomfortable but silent. Then Ruth started. When she introduced me to her friends at the grocery store, she wouldn't say, "Naomi bought a house," she would say, "We have a family place down at Sable Point now, a lovely little family retreat." I remember the first time I heard her say it. My stomach clenched, a warning signal flashing in my brain. Correct her. A voice inside me screamed, "Tell her it is not a family place. Tell her it is your house." But I didn't. I stood there and smiled, because I didn't want to make a scene in the produce aisle. I didn't want to be the difficult daughter. I didn't want to seem ungrateful for the $3,000. And that was the fatal error. Sitting here now on the floor of my foyer, listening to the ocean breeze rattle the window panes, I realized the bitter truth. My family did not break into my house today because they are evil, or because they are criminal masterminds. They did it because I taught them they could. Every time I swallowed an insult, I gave them permission to escalate. Every time I loaned money, I knew I wouldn't get back. I taught them my resources were community property. Every time I stayed silent when Ruth called my home the family retreat, I signed a verbal contract agreeing to this delusion. I had spent my entire life teaching them that my no was just a speed bump. I had taught them that if they pushed hard enough, if they used enough guilt, if they dragged the children in front of them like human shields, I would eventually flatten myself into a doormat for them to wipe their feet on. They thought today was just another negotiation. They thought they would shove a sofa through the door, cry a little about how hard Lena's life is, mention how happy the kids looked in the yard, and I would sigh and say, "Okay, just for a few weeks." And a few weeks would turn into months, and months would turn into forever. But they didn't know about the locksmith. They didn't know about the new security system I had researched last night after a particularly invasive phone call from Lena. They didn't know that the girl who used to hide quarters in a biology textbook had grown up into a woman who negotiates commercial real estate contracts with sharks for a living. I stood up, dusting the lint off my trousers. My legs felt steadier now. The history was heavy. Yes, it was a tragedy of errors, an enabling that spanned 3 decades. But history is just what happened yesterday. It doesn't have to be what happens tomorrow. I looked at the front door. The deadbolt was a solid, horizontal line of silver. For the first time in 33 years, the answer was going to be no. And this time, it was going to stay no. I sat on the beige linen sofa in my living room, my knees drawn up tight against my chest, making myself as small as possible. The silence I had fought so hard for inside the house was under siege. From the front porch came the heavy, deliberate sounds of invasion. Thud. That was another box hitting the floorboards. Scrape. That sounded like heavy furniture being dragged across the painted wood of the porch. Every noise sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through my bloodstream. I had the phone pressed to my ear. Listening to the dial tone switch to a ringing sound. I was not calling 911. This was volatile, but it wasn't an emergency yet. I was calling the non-emergency line for the Bay Ridge Police Department, a number I had looked up with trembling fingers just moments ago. Bay Ridge Dispatch, Officer Miller speaking, a male voice answered, calm and bored, a stark contrast to the riot happening in my chest. "Hello?" I said, forcing my voice to drop from a panic-stricken squeak to something resembling professional composure. "My name is Naomi Hunt. I reside at 412 Ocean Drive in Sable Point. I am currently locked inside my home while my relatives are attempting to move their belongings in without my consent." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the click of a keyboard. You said relatives, ma'am? Is this a domestic dispute? It is a trespassing situation, I corrected him, gripping the phone tighter. They do not live here. They have never lived here. My mother and cousin have hired a moving truck and are currently unloading furniture onto my porch. They are claiming they have a right to be here because we are family. I need to go on record stating they have no permission to enter. Okay, Ms. Hunt, Officer Miller said. His tone shifted, becoming more authoritative. Listen to me carefully. Do not open the door. Do not let them inside to use the bathroom. Get a glass of water, or talk. If they gain entry and stay overnight, or if they move enough belongings inside to establish what looks like residency, this stops being a trespassing issue and becomes a civil landlord-tenant dispute. At that point, the police cannot remove them without an eviction order. My blood ran cold. That was exactly Lena's game. She knew the system. She knew how to squat. I have deadbolted the doors, I said. They are not getting in. Good. If they attempt to break a window or force the door, call 911 immediately. Otherwise, we can send a patrol car by to assess the situation if they refuse to leave. They seem to be pausing now, I said, listening. The heavy thuds had stopped. I just wanted this logged. I need a paper trail. It is logged. Ms. Hunt, call back if it escalates. I hung up and immediately dialed again. This time, I called a locksmith service in town, a place called Bay Ridge Secure. I didn't care what it cost. I need every lock on my house changed. I told the dispatcher the moment he picked up. Front door, back door, side garage door. I need high-security deadbolts. We can get someone out there tomorrow afternoon, the man said. No, I said, and my voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again, channeling the tone I used when a contractor tried to overcharge me at work. I mean, tomorrow morning, first thing, 8 o'clock. This is a safety issue. I have people with unauthorized keys trying to access the property. The man on the line paused. He must have heard the desperate edge I was trying to hide. Okay, I will shift some things around. Miguel will be there at 8. He is our best guy. Thank you, I breathed. Just thank you. We will help you stay safe, ma'am. Those simple words made tears prick at my eyes again, but I blinked them away. I didn't have time to cry. I crept off the sofa and moved toward the front window, keeping my body pressed against the wall so my shadow wouldn't fall across the blinds. I peered through the slat. The scene outside was a masterclass in public manipulation. Ruth was standing in the middle of the driveway, looking up at the house with her hands on her hips. She wasn't just yelling, she was performing. I cannot believe this, she shouted, her voice pitched perfectly to carry over the sound of the ocean to the neighbors' yards. We raised her. We gave her everything, and she locks her own mother out on the street? She leaves her little nephew out here in the sun? She wiped at her eyes, dry, I was sure, and looked around to see if anyone was watching. Lena was sitting on one of the boxes they had dumped on the porch, scrolling through her phone. She looked bored. She looked up at the window, right where I was hiding, and rolled her eyes. She is so dramatic, Lena said, loud enough for me to hear through the glass. She always has to make a scene. We are just trying to move in, and she acts like we are robbing the place. It is my house, too. You know, Grandpa basically paid for it. I know, honey, I know, Ruth cooed, loud and theatrical. She is just confused. She has been under a lot of stress at work. She will come to her senses. I felt my phone buzz in my hand. It was a text from Caroline. Naomi, I am watching from my kitchen. Your mother just tried to wave me over. She is telling the mailman that you are having a mental breakdown and she is here to take care of you. Do you want me to come over? My thumbs flew across the screen. No, please stay inside. I don't want you dragged into this. Thank you for alerting me earlier. Please do not believe a word she says. I am safe. I just need them to leave. The response came back a minute later. I told her I do not get involved in other people's housing business. Stay strong, dear. Outside, the dynamic was shifting. The movers, Two guys who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the domestic drama were closing the back of the truck. They were shaking their heads. They had realized this wasn't a standard job. Ruth was arguing with one of them, pointing aggressively at the house, but the driver just held up his hands and walked toward the cab. He wasn't going to break down a door for $50 an hour. "Fine!" Ruth screamed, her composure cracking. She turned toward the house, her face red and contorted with genuine rage. "Fine! Be that way. Naomi, be selfish. See how far it gets you." She grabbed Lena's arm, and they began to gather the kids, but they didn't take the boxes. There were 5 or 6 plastic bins left on my porch, like landmines. It was a statement. We are not leaving. We are just pausing. "We will be back this weekend," Ruth shrieked at the closed door. "We will be back on Saturday. You better have those doors unlocked by then, young lady. You will have calmed down by then and we can discuss this like adults." Lena flipped a middle finger at the house as she climbed into Ruth's sedan. I watched as the rental truck rumbled away, followed by my mother's car. I watched until they turned the corner at the end of the block. Only then did I exhale. The breath left me in a long, shuddering rush that made my ribs ache. I was alone. The house was quiet again, save for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, charged silence of a ceasefire. Saturday. They said they would be back Saturday. That gave me 4 days. I didn't go back to the couch. I walked into the kitchen and opened my laptop on the quartz island. My hands had stopped shaking. A cold, mechanical clarity had taken over. If they wanted a war, I would not fight it with screaming matches on the lawn. I would fight it with paper. I would fight it with the one thing my family hated more than anything else: facts. I created a new folder on my desktop. I named it War File. I began to scan. First, the deed. I pulled the original document from my fireproof safe. I scanned it in high resolution. Owner, Naomi Hunt. No other names. No beneficiaries. Next, the mortgage statements. I downloaded the last 12 months of payment history from the bank portal. Every single withdrawal came from a checking account solely in my name. Then, the letter from my grandfather. I took the fragile piece of paper out of its envelope. I read it again, his shaky handwriting grounding me. To build something that is yours alone. I scanned it. This was my moral armor. Finally, I logged into my bank's archive search. I scrolled back 4 years. It took me 20 minutes of digging, but I found it. The image of the deposited check from Ruth and Gerald Cole. Amount: $3,000. Memo line: for your dream home. I stared at that memo line. She hadn't written investment. She hadn't written partial ownership. She hadn't written loan. She had written, for your dream home. I took a screenshot. I opened a Word document and pasted the image. Underneath it, I typed, transaction clearly labeled as a gift. No contract signed. No repayment terms discussed or documented. I walked room to room, taking photos of the current state of the house. I photographed the empty guest rooms. I photographed the master bedroom with my clothes in the closet. I photographed the scratches on the porch siding where Lena had thrown the box. I was building a fortress of evidence. When I was done, the sun had set. The house was dark, but the light from my laptop screen illuminated my face. I picked up my phone and opened the calendar app. I scrolled to Saturday. I tapped the plus sign to add an event. Title: They Are Coming. Time: 8 in the morning. I looked at the words glowing on the screen. A few hours ago, I had been a trembling child hiding on the floor, but the Naomi who typed those words was someone else. I was the woman who closed million-dollar commercial deals. I was the woman who had survived this family for 33 years. I whispered to the empty room, my voice steady and hard as stone. Let them come. I am not the one who is going to break this time. The next morning arrived with a gray, steel-colored light that matched the feeling in my chest. I had slept in fits and starts, waking up at every creak of the floorboards, half expecting to see Lena standing at the foot of my bed. But when 8 o'clock rolled around, the only person in my driveway was Miguel from Bay Ridge Secure. Miguel was a man of few words, built like a fire hydrant, and wearing a utility belt that jingled with the reassuring sound of heavy metal. He didn't ask why a woman with dark circles under her eyes needed every entry point of her home rekeyed on a Wednesday morning. He just looked at the scratches on the doorframe where the movers had banged a sofa the day before, then looked at me. "I need to be the only person on earth who can open this door," I told him, standing on the porch with my arms crossed against the morning chill. "I need to know that no matter who has an old copy, it will not work. Can you do that?" Miguel nodded slowly. He didn't offer pity, he offered competence. "I see this a lot," he said, his voice gravelly. "Breakups, family feuds. Don't worry. By the time I leave, Fort Knox will be easier to get into than this cottage." I watched him work. There was something deeply therapeutic about watching the old brass tumblers being ripped out of the wood. Those were the locks my mother had keys to. Those were the locks Lena had opened yesterday with such entitlement. As each one clattered into Miguel's trash bucket, I felt a tiny thread of their control snap. While he worked on the side door, I took out my phone. I opened my notes app and found the entry labeled House Codes. I deleted the line about the spare key hidden inside the fake rock by the hose bib. I walked outside, picked up the fake rock, and threw it into the trash bin. I found a new spot, a hollow in the base of an old oak tree in the backyard that was impossible to see unless you were lying on the ground, and I made a mental map that I wrote down nowhere. By 9 o'clock, the house was sealed. I paid Miguel with a credit card, thanked him, and then got into my car. I had called Allison, my manager at Copperline, and told her I was taking a personal half-day. I didn't tell her why. I wasn't ready for my professional life to know about the wreckage of my personal one. My first stop was the Bay Ridge County Register of Deeds. The office smelled of dust and floor wax. It was a place of quiet power, where the chaos of human relationships was reduced to ink on paper. I waited in line behind a man filing a construction lien, my foot tapping a nervous rhythm on the tile. When it was my turn, I asked the clerk for a certified, notarized copy of the deed for 412 Ocean Drive. She printed it out on thick, bonded paper. I stared at it. Grantee, Naomi Hunt. There was no et al. There was no the Cole Family Trust. Just my name, stark and solitary. It looked lonely on the page, but for the first time, that loneliness felt like a shield. I paid the $10 fee and slid the document into a crisp manila folder. Next was the bank. I sat across from the branch manager, a woman named Sarah, who had helped me set up my mortgage 4 years ago. She saw the tension in my jaw and didn't make small talk. "I need everything, Sarah," I said. "I need a full printout of the mortgage history from day one. I need the tax escrow records. I need the insurance payments. And I need a specific search done on my checking account for any incoming transfers from Ruth or Gerald Cole." The printer whirred for a long time. Sarah laid the stack of papers on the desk. "Here is the mortgage," she said, pointing to column after column of figures. "Paid monthly. Direct debit from your account. Never late." "And the incoming transfers?" I asked. "Just the one," she said, sliding a single sheet across the desk. 4 years ago, $3,000, nothing since. I looked at the stack of papers representing hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own labor, my own stress, my own money. Then I looked at the single sheet representing their contribution. The disparity was so vast it was almost funny. They were trying to buy a castle for the price of a sandwich. I left the bank and drove to a copy shop downtown. I didn't want to use the printer at work. I didn't want to leave any digital trace on company servers. I stood by the high-speed copier, watching the light flash rhythmically as I made 3 identical dossiers. Each dossier contained the deed, the mortgage history, the tax records, the police report number from yesterday, and the screenshot of the $3,000 check with the gift memo. I labeled the first folder Home and put it in my tote bag. I labeled the second folder Work to keep in my locked desk drawer. I took a Sharpie to the third folder and wrote, "If anything happens to me." I drove back to Sable Point and walked next door to Caroline's house. She answered on the first ring. wiping flour off her hands. When she saw the folder, her expression shifted from neighborly warmth to serious concern. "Naomi," she said softly, "is it that bad?" "I hope not," I said, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "But I need you to keep this, if the police ever have to come back when I'm not here, or if my mother tells you a story that sounds crazy, please just open this folder." Caroline took it like it was a sacred text. "It goes in my safe," she promised, "right next to my passports." I walked back to my house, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. I was prepared, but as soon as I sat down at my kitchen island and turned my phone off silent mode, the world came crashing back in. My screen was a wall of notifications. The family group chat, ironically named Cole Family Circle, had 42 unread messages. I took a deep breath and opened it. It was like stepping into a parallel reality. Ruth was spinning a narrative so detailed and emotionally charged, it was almost impressive. "Ruth, I just cannot stop crying. To think we raised her to be this cold, locking her own mother out." Aunt Margie, from Ohio. "Oh my God. Ruth, did she actually change the locks?" "Ruth, yes, and Lena had to take the babies to a motel because we thought we were sleeping there. Tyler is asking why Aunt Naomi hates him." "Lena, I just do not understand how someone can be so greedy. She has 3 bedrooms. We just needed a place to land for a few months. She is letting us rot." "Cousin Brad, that is messed up. Do you need me to drive down there and talk some sense into her?" I scrolled up, feeling bile rise in my throat. They weren't just venting, they were mobilizing. Ruth was painting a picture of me as an unstable, cruel tyrant who had pulled the rug out from under a struggling single mother. There was no mention of the keys I never gave them, no mention of the lack of permission, no mention of the fact that Lena had a perfectly fine apartment she had voluntarily left. Then I saw the social media notification. It was from a second cousin I hadn't seen since I was 12. He had posted a status update, tagging my mother, "Praying for my Aunt Ruth today. It is sad when money changes people. Imagine calling the cops on your own family just because they needed a roof over their heads. Some people have ice in their veins." I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck. It was public now. I opened my work email on my phone, just to check, and saw a message from a colleague in the marketing department. The subject line was just, "Hey? Hi, Naomi. This is awkward, but I saw a post your cousin shared on Facebook. It is getting some comments from people in town. I know it is none of my business, but I wanted you to know people are talking. Hope you are okay." I dropped the phone on the counter as if it had burned me. The isolation was immediate. That was their tactic. If they couldn't control me with guilt, they would control me with shame. They wanted me to feel so surrounded, so judged, that I would open the door just to make the noise stop. They were betting on the fact that I cared about my reputation more than my boundaries. I walked into the living room and sat in the dark. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the floor. I didn't turn on the lamps. I needed the dark. I picked up the phone one last time. I opened the group chat. I read through the stream of vitriol again. Selfish, crazy, cruel, unstable. I realized something profound in that silence. Not one person, not my aunt, not my cousins, not the distant relatives chiming in with prayer hands emojis, had asked me what happened. Not one of them had sent a private message saying, "Naomi, this doesn't sound like you. What is going on?" They didn't want the truth. They wanted the drama. They wanted the villain. And I had been cast in the role because I was the only one who had something they wanted. I didn't type a defense. I didn't explain about the deed or the money or the years of emotional blackmail. Facts would not work here. This was not a debate. It was a witch hunt. I went to the group settings. I hit leave group. Then I went to Ruth's contact. I opened a new message window. My thumbs hovered over the glass. I needed to be clear. I needed to be absolute. I typed, "Do not try to enter my house again. If you or Lena set foot on my property, I will call the police immediately and press charges for trespassing. This is not a negotiation." I hit send. Then I blocked the number. I blocked Lena. I blocked Gerald. I blocked the cousin from Ohio. I sat in the dark, the silence ringing in my ears, clutching the phone like a weapon. The legal wall was built. The locks were changed. The evidence was gathered. But I knew Saturday was coming, and I knew that people like Ruth and Lena didn't stop just because you asked them to. They only stopped when they hit a wall they couldn't break. I was going to be that wall. Saturday morning broke with a heavy, suffocating heat that clung to the windows of the cottage. The air conditioning was humming steadily, but inside my chest, the atmosphere felt tight and volatile. I had been awake since 5 o'clock, pacing the length of my hardwood floors, drinking coffee that I couldn't taste. I was not dressed for a lazy weekend. I had put on a pair of stiff denim jeans and a plain black t-shirt, clothes that felt utilitarian, almost tactical. On the dining table, positioned exactly where the morning light hit the surface, sat my armor. It was the manila folder labeled Home, containing the deed, the mortgage history, and the bank records. Next to it lay my phone, fully charged, and the spare key to the new deadbolts. I was ready. At 9:15, the sound of a heavy engine grumbled down the quiet street. I moved to the side of the living room window, peering through the slat of the blinds. It was a procession. The rental truck from earlier in the week was back, lumbering down the road like a siege engine. Behind it was my mother's beige sedan, and bringing up the rear was my father's rusted pickup truck, the bed piled high with black plastic garbage bags and plastic totes. They weren't just moving furniture this time. They were moving their entire lives. I watched as the convoy pulled onto my lawn. They didn't even bother with the driveway this time. Gerald drove his truck right up onto the grass I had paid a landscaper to resod last month. Ruth stepped out of the sedan. She looked radiant, dressed in a flowing sundress and a wide-brimmed hat, looking every bit the matriarch arriving at her summer estate. She clapped her hands together, shouting over the rumble of the idling engines. "We are here," she announced, her voice carrying clear through the glass. "Come on, everyone. Say hello to the house. No more cramped apartment for us." Lena climbed out of the passenger seat. She was wearing oversized sunglasses that covered half her face and holding her phone up at arm's length. I watched her adjust her hair in the screen reflection before hitting record. "Hey guys," Lena said to her camera, pivoting to get the cottage in the background. "Moving day part 2. Finally getting settled into the family beach house. You know what they say? Family is everything. So blessed to have this view for the kids." It was a performance, a completely fabricated reality broadcast to 300 followers, cementing a lie before she had even stepped inside. Ruth marched up the walkway, swinging a keychain on her finger. It was the old key, the key I had given her for emergencies only, the key to a lock that no longer existed. I held my breath. Ruth reached the front door. She made a show of it, calling out, "Naomi, we are here. Don't worry. We will handle the unpacking." She slid the key into the lock. Or rather, she tried to. I saw her wrist jerk as the key hit the new, unfamiliar metal guard of the high-security deadbolt Miguel had installed. She frowned, pulling it back and jamming it forward again. Clink, clink. She jiggled the handle, locked tight. She tried the key again, aggressive now, twisting it with force that would have snapped a weaker piece of brass. "What on earth?" she muttered, loud enough to be heard. Then she stepped back, looked at the key, looked at the door, and her face transformed. The radiant matriarch vanished. In her place was a woman scorned. She slammed her fist against the wood. Bang, bang, bang. "Naomi!" she screamed. The pleasant facade shattered instantly. "Naomi Hunt! Open this door right now. This key does not work. What did you do?" Lena lowered her phone. The live stream apparently paused. "Mom, what is wrong?" "She changed it," Ruth shrieked, her voice cracking. "She changed the locks. I told her we were coming, and she changed the locks." I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I picked up my phone. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the adrenaline. I dialed the Bay Ridge Police Department again. Dispatch, the voice answered. This is Naomi Hunt at 412 Ocean Drive, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, cold, detached. I called earlier in the week. I have individuals attempting to force entry into my home. They are banging on the doors and trying to use unauthorized keys. I need an officer dispatched immediately. Are they armed, ma'am? No, but they are aggressive, and they are refusing to leave. We have a unit in the area. Sit tight. Outside, the noise was escalating. Lena had joined Ruth on the porch. She can't do that, Lena yelled. We have rights. We have stuff in the truck. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Lena turned to Tyler, who was standing by the truck looking confused and scared. She pointed toward the back of the house. Ty, baby, Lena said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial urge. Run around to the back door, okay? See if the glass door is open. Aunt Naomi probably forgot to lock that one. Go check for Mommy. She was sending an 8-year-old to break into a house. I didn't wait. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher. They are sending a child to check the perimeter, I said sharply. Please hurry. I moved to the kitchen, keeping out of sight of the sliding glass doors. I saw Tyler's small face press against the glass, his hands cupping his eyes. He pulled on the handle. It didn't budge. The security bar I had placed in the track held firm. Tyler ran back around to the front. It is locked too, Mom. Damn it, Lena screamed. She kicked a planter off the edge of the porch. The terracotta pot shattered on the driveway, the sound sharp and violent. She ruined everything. She knew we gave notice at the apartment. She is trying to make us homeless. Naomi, Ruth bellowed, backing up into the yard to look at the second-story windows. I know you are in there. You are a cruel, heartless girl. Open this door before I break a window. Then, the sound of salvation. A siren chirped, just a short, sharp burst, and a blue and white cruiser rolled up the street, followed closely by a second one. The transformation in my family was instantaneous. Ruth stopped screaming. She smoothed down her dress. Lena quickly shoved her phone into her pocket. Gerald, who had been leaning against his truck smoking a cigarette, flicked the butt into my grass and stood up straight. 2 officers stepped out. One was older, with graying hair and a weary expression, Officer Vance. His name tag read. The other was younger, looking tense as he assessed the shattered pot on the driveway. Okay, folks, let's lower the volume, Officer Vance said, walking up the driveway with his thumbs hooked in his vest. We got a call about a disturbance and attempted entry. Who lives here? I do, Ruth shouted immediately, stepping forward with a wide, incredulous smile. I am the mother. This is our family home. My daughter is inside having some sort of episode. She has locked us out and we have a moving truck full of furniture burning gas. Is your name on the deed, ma'am? Vance asked, his voice flat. Well, technically it is in her name for tax purposes, Ruth said, waving her hand dismissively. But we paid for the down payment. We help with the bills. It is a family arrangement. She is just being difficult today because we had a little spat about... Officer! I opened the front door. I didn't step out fully. I stood in the doorway. The screen door still latched between us. I held the manila folder against my chest. I am Naomi Hunt, I said clearly. I am the sole owner of this property. These people do not live here. They have never lived here, and they are trespassing. Ruth gasped, clutching her pearls in a gesture so cliché it would have been funny if the situation weren't so dangerous. Naomi, how dare you speak to the police like that about your own mother? Officer Vance looked at me, then at Ruth, then at the moving truck. He walked up the steps to the porch. Ma'am, step back, please, he said to Lena, who was trying to edge closer to the door. He looked at me through the screen. You are the homeowner? Yes, sir, I said. I unlatched the screen door and stepped out. Closing the main door firmly behind me, I handed him the folder. This is the deed. This is the mortgage history for the last 4 years. This is the tax record. And here is a copy of the bank transfer from 4 years ago showing the only money they ever gave me was a one-time gift of $3,000. Vance opened the folder. He took his time. He adjusted his glasses. The silence on the porch was heavy. Ruth tried to fill it. "Officer, really, this is ridiculous. A daughter doesn't do this. We have rights. We have an agreement." "Ma'am, be quiet," Vance said. He didn't look up from the papers. He flipped through the mortgage statements. He saw the consistent payments from my account. He saw the lack of any other names. He saw the gift memo on the check copy. He closed the folder and looked at me. "You want them removed?" "I want them to leave," I said, "and I want them to know that they cannot come back." Vance turned around to face the driveway. He walked down the steps, his boots heavy on the wood. He stopped in front of Ruth. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "you need to get in your car. You need to tell the moving truck to turn around, and you need to leave this property immediately." Ruth's mouth fell open. "Excuse me? You cannot kick me out of my daughter's house. I am an elderly woman. You have to respect parents. This is a civil matter." "This is not a civil matter," Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming hard and official. "The documentation is clear. You have no lease. You have no name on the title. You have no proof of residency. What you have is a homeowner telling you to leave." "But," Lena started. "If you do not leave," Vance continued, cutting her off, "or if you set foot on this property again without Ms. Hunt's explicit invitation, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Do I make myself clear?" Ruth blinked, her face draining of color. She looked at the officer, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the moment where he would wink and say he was just kidding, that of course mothers were in charge. It didn't happen. "But we gave up our apartment," Lena whispered, the reality finally piercing her entitlement. "Where are we supposed to go?" "That is not a police matter," Vance said. "Move the vehicles, now." I stood on the porch, clutching my elbows. I watched my mother look up at me. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the overpowering giant she had always been. I saw a small, stunned woman standing on a lawn she didn't own, realizing that her words had finally lost their power to reshape reality. She looked as if I had slapped her across the face. And in a way, I had slapped her with the truth. The departure of my family was not a retreat. It was an explosion of shrapnel. As Officer Vance stood with his arms crossed, watching them pack back into their vehicles, Lena dissolved into a performance of grief that would have won awards. She sank onto the running board of Gerald's truck, sobbing loudly enough to wake the dead. "My babies!" she wailed, clutching Tyler's shoulders as if I were personally ripping him from her arms. "They just wanted to build sandcastles. They just wanted a normal childhood. Now they have to go back to nothing because their aunt hates them." She made sure to face Caroline's house as she screamed, broadcasting her misery to the entire neighborhood. Tyler and Ava looked more confused than heartbroken, standing awkwardly by the tires. But Lena's narrative didn't require their participation, only their presence. Ruth was less theatrical, but more vicious. She slammed the door of her sedan so hard the windows rattled. Before she got in, she turned to me, her face contorted with a hate I had never seen before. "You are weaponizing the law against your own blood," she shrieked, her finger jabbing the air. "You call men with guns to chase away your mother? You are sick, Naomi. You are sick in the head." Gerald didn't look at me. He was already in the driver's seat of the pickup, staring straight ahead. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, calculating the hourly rate of the moving truck, realizing that the gamble had failed and the house always wins, or in this case, the person with the deed wins. When the last taillight disappeared around the bend, the silence didn't return. Instead, my phone began to vibrate against the porch railing where I had set it. It started with a call from a number I didn't recognize, then another from an area code I hadn't seen in years. I made the mistake of answering the first one. "Naomi? This is Aunt Linda," a voice crackled. "I just saw your mother's message. Honey, tell me you did not call the police on Ruth. Tell me that is a misunderstanding. You know family matters stay in the house." "I have to go," I said, and hung up. The next text was from a high school friend of Lena's I hadn't spoken to in a decade. Wow. Just wow. Way to kick a single mom when she is down. You have gone too far. Naomi. They were swarming. The narrative had been set, and I was the villain. I went back inside and locked the door, engaging every bolt Miguel had installed, but the walls felt thin. The judgment was seeping through the cracks. Monday morning was worse. I walked into the break room at Copperline Harbor Development to get my morning coffee. The office was buzzing with the usual Monday energy, but as soon as I entered, the conversation stopped. Two junior analysts were huddled near the espresso machine. They looked at me, then looked away quickly. I poured my coffee, feeling the heat on the back of my neck. Then I saw it. Taped to the community bulletin board, right next to the sign-up sheet for the charity 5K, was a printout. It was a screenshot of Lena's Facebook post from Saturday. Driven from our family home by greed. Promised a sanctuary for my kids, only to be met with police cars. Some people love money more than their own flesh and blood. Someone had printed it. Someone in this office, my professional sanctuary, was watching my personal train wreck and enjoying it. I ripped the paper down, my hands shaking so hard I spilled hot coffee on my wrist. I threw it in the trash and walked straight to my desk, my face burning. An hour later, an email popped up. Please see me. Allison. My stomach dropped. Allison was the VP of HR. She was kind but rigorous. I walked into her office prepared to be fired. I was prepared to be told that my drama was a liability, that a real estate development firm couldn't have an employee who was publicly accused of stealing houses. Allison closed the door. She gestured to the chair. Naomi, she said softly, I saw the paper in the break room. I took it out of the trash to document it. I looked at my shoes. I am so sorry. Allison, it is a personal matter. It won't affect my work. I can explain. You don't need to apologize, she interrupted. But I need to know if you are safe, and I need to know what is actually happening, so I can protect you here. I looked up. Her eyes weren't judgmental. They were concerned. I broke. I told her everything. I pulled the folder labeled work out of my bag, the one with the deed, the police report, the mortgage statements. I laid it all out on her desk. The $3,000 check, the years of manipulation, the Saturday morning siege. Allison listened without interrupting. When I finished, she let out a long breath. Naomi, she said, leaning forward, you are not crazy, and you are not the villain here. This is harassment, plain and simple. She tapped the police report. This document protects you, and as for the office, if anyone posts something like that again, it is a violation of our workplace conduct policy. I will send a general memo about office gossip today. But if Lena or your mother tries to contact you here, or show up in the lobby, I want you to tell security immediately. We can ban them from the premises. I felt a weight lift off my chest, so heavy I hadn't realized I was carrying it. Thank you, I whispered. I thought everyone believed them. People believe the loudest voice, Allison said. Until the facts show up, you have the facts. Hold on to them. I went home that evening feeling slightly stronger. But the war wasn't over. It was shifting fronts. I sat on my couch with a glass of wine, listening to the voicemails I had ignored all day. Ruth had left 3. The first was weeping. How could you, Naomi? Grandpa is rolling in his grave. You trampled on his wishes. The second was angry. You are a traitor. You have betrayed this family for a few square feet of drywall. I hope you are happy alone in that big house. The third was different. The tone was low, almost conversational, which made it terrifying. You know, Naomi. Ruth's voice purred through the speaker. I was thinking, if you are so eager to involve the state in our business, maybe the state should know everything. Maybe they should know what kind of person you really are. Maybe they should know if a woman who hates family so much is safe to be around children. I wonder what Child Protective Services would think about a person who evicts minors onto the street. They take child endangerment very seriously. I froze. The glass of wine trembled in my hand. She wasn't just venting anymore. She was threatening to weaponize the system against me in a way that could destroy my reputation permanently. She was implying that she would report me. For what? For endangerment? Because I didn't let them squat? But the implication was darker. She was suggesting that if I didn't fold, she would drag Tyler and Ava into this mess officially. She would use her own grandchildren as pawns in a false report just to punish me. I looked at the phone in the dark room. The screen cast a pale, ghostly light on my face. I realized then that there was no bottom. There was no line they wouldn't cross. They didn't care about the house anymore. They cared about winning. And if they had to burn down my life, and the lives of those kids, to do it, they would strike the match without hesitation. I set the glass down. I didn't delete the voicemail. I saved it. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "If that is how you want to play." 3 days after the police removed my family from my driveway, the war moved from my front lawn to a battlefield I was not prepared for, the sterile, terrifying corridors of bureaucracy. I was standing in the main conference room at Copperline Harbor Development, organizing a stack of blueprints for a presentation on the new boardwalk renovation. My hands were steady. My mind was focused on zoning permits and environmental impact reports. For a few hours, I had successfully compartmentalized the chaos of my personal life, pretending that I was just Naomi Hunt, a successful project manager, and not Naomi Hunt, the daughter who had threatened her mother with arrest. My phone buzzed on the mahogany table. It was an unknown number. Usually, I would send it to voicemail during a prep session, but a cold instinct, a prickle on the back of my neck, told me to answer. I stepped out into the hallway, pressing the phone to my ear. "This is Naomi," I said. "Ms. Hunt? This is Patricia Alvarez from the Bay Ridge County Department of Social Services, Child Protective Division." The world stopped. The hum of the office air conditioning, the distant chatter of colleagues, the sound of my own breathing, it all vanished into a ringing silence. "Yes," I managed to say. My voice sounded thin, like it was coming from a great distance. "Ms. Hunt, we have received a report regarding the welfare of 2 minors, Tyler Morrow and Ava Morrow. You are listed as a relative and a party involved in a recent housing incident. Do you have a moment to speak?" I leaned against the cool drywall of the corridor because my knees suddenly felt like water. "I am listening." "We have received an allegation that you have forcibly evicted the mother and children from their primary residence," Ms. Alvarez read, her voice devoid of emotion. Just a professional reciting a checklist. "The report states that you, and I quote, threw a single mother and 2 underage children onto the street without notice, denying them access to a property that was promised and designated as their stable housing, thereby knowingly placing the minors in a state of homelessness and distress." The room spun. It wasn't just a figure of speech. The hallway actually tilted. They had done it. Ruth's voicemail hadn't been an idle threat. My own mother and cousin had called the government and filed a false report, claiming I was endangering Tyler and Ava. They were willing to open a file on those innocent kids, willing to invite state investigators into their lives, just to punish me. "Ms. Hunt, are you there?" I closed my eyes. I took a breath that rattled in my chest. I thought of the folder on my desk. I thought of the police report. I thought of the war file. "I am here," I said. My voice was trembling, but I forced it into the lower, firmer register I used when a contractor tried to lie about a deadline. "Ms. Alvarez, I need you to listen to me very carefully. That report is a retaliatory fabrication. We have to investigate all—" "I understand," I interrupted, fighting the urge to scream. "But you need to know the facts immediately. Lena Morrow and her children do not live at my address. They have never lived at my address. They reside with my parents, Ruth and Gerald Cole, at a separate address 30 miles inland. There was no eviction because there was no tenancy. The report claims they were moving in when you barred entry," Ms. Alvarez said, the sound of typing clicking in the background. "They were attempting to trespass," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I have a police report from Saturday morning filed with the Bay Ridge Police Department." Officer Vance responded. He confirmed that I am the sole owner of the property and that my relatives had no legal right to be there. He escorted them off the premises. They are not homeless. They returned to my parents' house, where they have been living for months. The typing stopped. There was a long pause. "You have a police report?" Ms. Alvarez asked. Her tone had shifted. It was less accusatory, more weary. "I do. I have the case number, and I can send you a scanned copy of the report, along with my deed and a timeline of events. I also have a voicemail from my mother, Ruth Cole, threatening to call your agency if I did not give in to her demands." "I see," Ms. Alvarez said softly. "In high-conflict family disputes, we sometimes see the reporting system used inappropriately." "They are using those children as pawns," I whispered, the horror of it finally catching up to me. "They don't care if you take them away, as long as I get in trouble." "We are not going to take anyone away based on a phone call, Ms. Hunt," she said, her voice kinder now. "But I need that documentation. Send me everything you have. If what you're saying matches the police records, we can resolve this quickly." I took down her email address. I hung up the phone and stood there in the empty hallway for a long time. I looked at my hands. They were shaking so hard I couldn't have held a pen. I didn't go back to the conference room. I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet and put my head between my knees, trying to keep from hyperventilating. It was one thing to fight over a house. It was one thing to scream on a lawn. But this was a nuclear option. They had crossed a line that I didn't even know existed. They were willing to traumatize Tyler and Ava. Because what happens when a social worker shows up to interview a confused 8-year-old just to twist the knife in my back? I left work early. I couldn't focus on boardwalks when my family was trying to dismantle my life. That evening, my kitchen table turned into a command center. I didn't cook. I didn't eat. I fed the scanner. I scanned the police report from Saturday, highlighting the officer's notes about criminal trespass warning issued. I scanned the deed again. I transcribed the voicemail from Ruth, word for word, including the timestamp. I wrote a cover letter that was clinically precise. Timeline of events: Tuesday, August 24th. Relatives attempt unauthorized move-in. Police called for standby. Wednesday, August 25th. Locks changed. Saturday, August 28th. Relatives attempt forced entry. Police called. Officer Vance confirms no residency established. Relatives leave voluntarily to return to the grandparents' home. I attached it all to an email addressed to Ms. Alvarez. Before I hit send, I stared at the screen. I was sending evidence against my own mother to the government. There is a primal part of the human brain that screams against this. It goes against every biological imperative to protect your tribe. But they weren't my tribe anymore. They were predators. I hit send. The next 3 days were a blur of anxiety. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. I imagined a squad car pulling up to take me away for child neglect. I imagined Lena spinning a story so convincing that a judge would believe I was a monster. Then, on Friday afternoon, a letter appeared in my mailbox. The return address was the County Department of Social Services. I opened it right there at the curb, the ocean wind whipping the paper in my hands. Investigation 49220B, determination unfounded. I read the paragraph below. Based on the evidence provided, including law enforcement records, the agency has determined that the allegations of housing instability and endangerment are without merit. The case is closed. There was a second paragraph, written in standard boilerplate language, but it felt like vindication printed in black ink. Please note that filing a false report with the intention to harass or retaliate is a violation of state statutes and may result in legal consequences for the reporting party. They knew. The agency knew exactly what Ruth and Lena had done, and now there was an official government record stating that my family had lied to authorities. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle into my bones. Defense was not enough. Blocking their numbers was not enough. Changing the locks was not enough. As long as they thought they could attack me without consequences, they would keep coming. I needed a bigger weapon. I drove into town, parking in front of a brick building on Main Street with a modest brass plaque. Elliot Harmon, attorney at law. Allison from HR had given me his name. He is not a shark, she had told me. He is a bulldog. He doesn't let go. Elliot was a man in his 50s with messy hair and a desk cluttered with files. He listened to me for 45 minutes without interrupting. I told him everything: the money, the move-in, the police, the social services report, the social media posts. When I finished, I laid the unfounded letter from social services on his desk. Elliot picked it up. He read it, then looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses. "Naomi," he said, his voice deep and gravelly, "you have been incredibly patient. Most people would have lost their temper by now." "I just want to be left alone," I said. "I just want my house and my peace." "They are not going to give you peace," Elliot said bluntly. "They have escalated at every turn. Trespassing is one thing. Weaponizing child protective services? That is malicious. That is an attempt to destroy your character and your livelihood." He leaned back in his chair. "We need to change the dynamic. Right now, you are the prey. They are poking you to see if you bleed. We need to show them that you have teeth." "What do we do?" I asked. "We file for a civil no-contact order," Elliot said. "It is stricter than a standard restraining order. It bans them from contacting you, coming within 500 feet of your home or workplace, and bans them from posting about you on social media if it constitutes harassment." "Will a judge grant that?" "With this?" Elliot waved the police report and the DSS letter. "Absolutely. You have a documented pattern of harassment, attempted illegal entry, and false reporting to government agencies. We go to court, we present this, and we ask for damages." "Damages?" "They cost you money," Elliot said. "The locksmith, the time off work, the emotional distress. We sue them for the cost of the security system you had to install. We sue for legal fees." He looked me right in the eye. "It is not about the money, Naomi. It is about consequences. People like your mother and cousin operate on the assumption that you will never make them pay. They think family is a get-out-of-jail-free card. We are going to revoke that card." I looked out the window of his office. I saw people walking down the street, living normal lives where their mothers didn't try to have them arrested or investigated. I realized I had been mourning the loss of a family I never really had. I had been trying to save a relationship that was already a corpse. "Do it," I said. "It will be ugly," Elliot warned. "They will scream. They will play the victim. They might try to countersue." "I don't care," I said, and for the first time in weeks, I meant it. "Draw up the papers. I want them served." Elliot nodded and pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. "Okay, let's get to work." Walking out of his office, the evening air felt different. For days, I had been looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next blow, waiting for the next truck, the next phone call, the next accusation. I had been a castle under siege, barring the doors and hoping the walls held. But as I unlocked my car, I looked at the reflection in the window. I didn't look like a victim anymore. I looked like someone who had just picked up a sword. I wasn't just defending my house anymore. I was taking back my life, and if they wanted a fight, I was finally ready to give them one they would actually lose. The text message arrived at 11:45 on a Tuesday, shattering the fragile rhythm of productivity I had managed to scrape together. I was in the middle of reviewing vendor contracts for the boardwalk project, my mind filled with lumber prices and labor unions, when my phone lit up on the desk. It was Caroline. "I hear noises at your back door. Someone is messing with the handle. I called the police. Do you have cameras?" The air left the room. For a split second, I just stared at the words, unable to comprehend that the nightmare was invading the daylight hours. I grabbed my keys and purse, sprinting past the receptionist without a word. "Naomi, is everything okay?" she called out. "Family emergency," I shouted back, the irony tasting bitter on my tongue as the elevator doors closed. The drive to Sable Point usually took 20 minutes. I made it in 12. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached, my heart hammering a frantic beat against my ribs. I wasn't thinking about the speed limit. I was thinking about the back door, the sliding glass one that faced the dunes, the one Lena had tried to send Tyler to check just a few days ago. When I turned onto my street, the flashing blue lights were already painting the midday sun with an artificial, strobing glare. A patrol car was parked at a crooked angle in front of my driveway. I slammed the car into park and ran across the lawn. Caroline was standing on her own porch, wrapped in a cardigan despite the heat, talking to a police officer. "I am the homeowner," I announced, breathless, running up the driveway. The officer turned. It wasn't Vance this time. It was a younger man with a buzz cut and a notepad. "Ms. Hunt?" "Yes. Is anyone inside? Did they get in?" "No entry gained, ma'am," the officer said, his voice calm and practiced. "But there is evidence of an attempt. Come with me." He led me around the side of the house, past the hydrangeas that were starting to wilt in the late summer heat. We stopped at the back door. The officer pointed to the frame. "There, right near the lock mechanism." The white vinyl of the door frame was chewed up. Deep, jagged gouges exposed the metal underneath. It wasn't a scratch from a careless mover. It was the distinct, violent mark of a pry bar or a large screwdriver being leveraged against the latch. I stared at the damage, feeling a wave of nausea. This wasn't an argument about a family home anymore. This was a felony. "Your neighbor, Ms. Hensley, stated she heard metal scraping and looked out her kitchen window," the officer said, flipping a page in his notebook. "She saw a female subject in a dark hoodie attempting to force the door. When Ms. Hensley shouted that she was calling the police, the subject fled on foot around the north side of the house." "Did she identify her?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "She said the build and height were similar to the woman who was here on Saturday. Your cousin, is that correct?" "Lena Morrow," I said. "Yes." "However," the officer continued, "Ms. Hensley could not positively identify the face because of the hood and the distance. She did state that the subject entered a waiting vehicle parked down the block, a dark sedan, possibly a Honda. Lena drove a dark gray Civic, but she had been borrowing Ruth's beige sedan lately." "A dark sedan?" That sounded like Lena's car, the one she supposedly couldn't afford to put gas in. "I know it was her," I said. "They are trying to get in to squat before I can get the restraining order. Without a positive ID or video footage, we cannot make an arrest today," the officer said, capping his pen. "We will file this as attempted burglary and add it to the existing case file regarding the trespassing. But Ms. Hunt, I strongly suggest you upgrade your security immediately. If we had a clear shot of her face, we would be having a very different conversation right now." I looked at the gouged door frame. "Consider it done." I didn't go back to work. I spent the afternoon with a team from Bay Ridge Tech Solutions. I told them I didn't care about the budget. I wanted eyes on every inch of my property. By 5 o'clock that evening, my cottage had been transformed into a surveillance state. We installed 4 high-definition cameras covering the front porch, the driveway, the back deck, and the side yard. We installed a smart doorbell that recorded audio and video the second someone stepped onto the mat. We put up floodlights with motion sensors so sensitive that a stray cat would turn the yard into a baseball stadium at high noon. All of it was linked to an app on my phone, backing up instantly to a cloud server that neither Ruth nor Lena could touch. "You are all set," the technician said, handing me the manual. "If a leaf blows across your porch, you will know about it." I sat at my kitchen island as the sun went down, watching the live feeds on my phone. The yard was empty, the street was quiet, but the peace was artificial. I felt like a sentry in a watchtower. At 7:30, my phone rang. It wasn't a number I knew. It was a prepaid burner phone, or maybe a friend's phone. I let it ring twice, staring at it, before the instinct to know the enemy's next move took over. "This is Naomi," I answered. "You bitch!" Ruth's voice was a distortion of static and screaming. She sounded breathless, frantic. "You sent the police to my house. You have the police questioning Lena in front of her children. Are you happy now? Are you happy that Tyler is crying because men with badges are asking his mother where she was at noon? I felt a cold smile touch my lips. I hadn't sent anyone. The police had done that on their own. I didn't send anyone, Mother, I said, my voice eerily calm. I was at work all day, until my neighbor called me to say someone was trying to break into my house with a crowbar. Liar, Ruth shrieked. Lena was with me. She was running errands. She wasn't near your precious palace. But now the cops are here, asking about her car and asking to see her shoes. You are harassing us. If Lena was running errands with you, then she has nothing to worry about, I said. The police are investigating an attempted burglary. If she wasn't there, the investigation will clear her. Why are you so upset if she is innocent? You are dead to me, Ruth spat. You hear me? You are dead. The line went dead. I put the phone down, my hands steady. Ruth had just confirmed two things. 1. The police took the break-in seriously enough to drive 30 miles to question Lena immediately. And 2. Lena was likely the one in the hoodie, because an innocent person doesn't scream about harassment. They provide an alibi. I thought the night was over, but the assault wasn't finished. It just changed mediums. An hour later, a notification pinged on my email. It was marked high importance. The sender was Harold J. Stein, attorney at law. I opened it. Dear Ms. Hunt, I represent Mrs. Ruth Cole and Mrs. Lena Morrow. I am writing to you regarding the outstanding financial obligation owed to my clients. On August 15th, 4 years ago, my clients transferred the sum of $3,000 to your account. This transfer was made with the verbal agreement and understanding that said, funds were an investment in the property at 412 Ocean Drive, securing a lifetime right of use and residency for the Cole family. Since you have breached this contract by denying access to the property, my clients are demanding the immediate repayment of the principal sum of $3,000, plus 4 years of interest calculated at 6%, and a punitive fee for breach of verbal contract. Total demand, $5,200. Failure to remit payment within 7 days will result in immediate legal action to place a lien on the property. I stared at the screen. I almost laughed. It was so desperate. They were trying to rewrite history because the physical break-in had failed. I forwarded the email to Elliot immediately with a short note. They are trying to say the gift was a loan. See attached. Elliot replied 9 minutes later. He must have been working late. Naomi. Do not worry about this. Harold Stein is a strip mall lawyer who mostly handles traffic tickets. This is a scare tactic. A verbal agreement regarding real estate interests is generally unenforceable under the statute of frauds. Real estate contracts have to be in writing. Plus, we have the check memo that says dream home, not loan, and we have your grandfather's letter establishing the source of the primary funds. This is good for us. It proves they are trying to extort you. I will draft a response that will make Mr. Stein wish he hadn't taken this case. Go to sleep. You are safe. I turned off my laptop. I walked around the house, turning off the lights until the only illumination came from the street lamps outside filtering through the blinds. I sat on the edge of my bed and picked up my phone one last time. I opened the security app. I cycled through the cameras. Camera 1. Front porch, empty. The wicker chair sat undisturbed. Camera 2. Driveway, empty. My car sat alone. Camera 3. Back door. The motion sensor light was off, meaning nothing was moving in the darkness. The gouged wood was invisible in the shadows, but I knew it was there. For years, I had told myself that my family was just difficult. I told myself they were needy, messy, and emotionally immature, but that they loved me in their own broken way. I had excused the guilt trips and the borrowing and the boundary stomping because I thought, at the end of the day, they are family. I looked at the blue glow of the empty back porch on my screen. Someone I was related to, someone I had shared Christmas mornings with, had stood there today with a metal tool and tried to pry open my home. They didn't care if they terrified me. They didn't care if they destroyed my property. They wanted what they wanted, and they were willing to commit a crime to take it. I realized then that the lock on the door wasn't just to keep people out. It was to keep the reality in. My family wasn't just toxic, they were dangerous. I set the phone on the nightstand, the screen facing out, a digital sentinel watching the dark. I pulled the duvet up to my chin, listening to the ocean, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt ready for the courtroom. The paper war began in earnest on a Wednesday morning in Elliot Harmon's office. The air smelled of old coffee and fresh toner, a scent that I was beginning to associate with my own survival. Elliot did not shout. He did not post angry status updates. He simply drafted a letter to Harold Stein, my mother's strip mall attorney, that was so sharp and precise it felt like watching a surgeon sharpen a scalpel. He attached the documents I had painstakingly gathered, the scan of the deed with only my name, the mortgage history showing 48 months of payments made solely by me, the letter from my grandfather establishing the source of the down payment, and the centerpiece of our defense, the image of the check from 4 years ago with the memo line, "For your dream home." "This is the kill shot," Elliot said, tapping the image of the check. "In the eyes of the law, a gift is a gift. You cannot retroactively decide a gift was a loan just because you are mad at the recipient. That is not how finance works." He laid out our terms in the letter. They were simple, almost generous. We proposed that I would agree not to pursue legal fees for the frivolous claim if, and only if, Ruth and Lena signed a formal settlement. They had to withdraw all financial demands. They had to sign a document acknowledging they had no interest in the property at Sable Point, and they had to sign a permanent, binding non-contact agreement. "It is an off-ramp," Elliot told me. "We are giving them a chance to walk away with their dignity before a judge strips it from them." But people like Ruth and Lena do not want dignity. They want victory. 2 days later, Harold Stein's response arrived. It was not a legal document so much as a tantrum typed on letterhead. Stein ignored the evidence of the check. Instead, he leaned heavily into emotional manipulation. He accused me of elder abuse for causing my mother distress. He claimed that I had made repeated verbal promises over the last 4 years, at Christmas dinners, at birthday parties, that the house was intended for the family trust. He threatened to sue me for promissory estoppel, claiming Lena had relied on my promises to her detriment when she gave up her apartment. I read the letter in Elliot's office, my hands shaking. "I never promised them anything," I said, my voice rising. "I just didn't argue with them because I wanted to keep the peace. Is that a crime?" "No," Elliot said calmly. "It is not." He pulled a thick file from his drawer. "And this is why we are not negotiating anymore. I expected them to double down. So, while Mr. Stein was writing his creative fiction, I filed this." He slid a document across the desk. It was heavy. The title page read, "Civil Complaint for Damages and Injunctive Relief." "We are suing them?" I asked, breathless. "We are petitioning for a permanent restraining order," Elliot corrected. "But we are also suing for the costs you incurred, the locksmith, the security cameras, the lost wages, and we are citing the pattern of harassment." He opened the file to a section labeled Discovery. "And because we filed this suit alleging a conspiracy to harass and defraud," Elliot said, his voice dropping to a serious, low register, "we were able to request certain communications relevant to the timeline of the alleged eviction." He looked at me, and his expression softened. "Naomi, what I am about to show you is going to hurt, but it is also going to set you free." He handed me a staple-bound packet of printed text messages. "These are logs recovered from the period leading up to the move-in attempt," Elliot explained. "Stein had to turn them over to prove Lena's detrimental reliance on your so-called promises. I don't think he read them closely enough before he submitted them into the record." I looked at the first page. It was a text thread between Mom and Lena. Date, August 10th, 2 weeks before the truck arrived. "Lena, I am worried she's going to say no. You know how she is about her space. Ruth, she won't say no. We just have to get the boxes inside. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Honey." Lena, "But what if she calls the cops?" Ruth, "She won't. She's too afraid of what the neighbors will think. Just get in the door. I felt a cold shiver ripple down my spine. They had banked on my shame. They had weaponized my desire to be a good girl. I turned the page. Lena. I looked it up. If we establish residency for 30 days, she has to formally evict us. That takes months. Once we are in for a month, we have tenant rights. She can't just kick us out. Ruth. Exactly. We just need to stick it out for 4 weeks. Then we can negotiate from a position of power. She will have to sign the house over to the trust if she wants us to leave. I put a hand over my mouth. It wasn't a desperate move by a struggling family. It was a hostile takeover. They had researched tenancy laws. They had planned to squat until I was forced to surrender ownership just to get them out. Keep reading, Elliot said softly. I looked at the entry from the morning of the first incident, the morning the truck arrived. Ruth, remember, if the police come, do not speak. Let me handle it. You just focus on the kids. Lena, what if they try to make us leave? Ruth, make the kids cry. If Tyler and Ava are crying, the police will hesitate. No officer wants to drag a crying child out of a home. Make sure the neighbors see it. Tears stung my eyes, hot and angry. Make the kids cry. My mother, the woman who claimed to be the matriarch, the protector, had instructed her daughter to traumatize my nephew and niece as a tactical maneuver. I flipped to the last page. The date was from the day they filed the report with social services. Lena, I don't know. Mom, calling CPS feels dangerous. What if they actually take the kids? Ruth, they won't. It is just a scare tactic. We need to rattle her cage. If she thinks she is going to lose her job or get investigated, she will drop the whole thing. Lena, that made me laugh. True. If she thinks the state is coming for her, she will lose sleep for the rest of her life. Serves her right for being so selfish. I dropped the packet on the desk. It landed with a dull thud. For years, whenever I tried to set a boundary, they told me I was crazy. They told me I was paranoid. They told me I was overreacting, that I was interpreting their love as control. I had spent thousands of dollars on therapy wondering why I couldn't just accept their help. I wasn't paranoid. I was perceptive. They planned it, I whispered. Every single step. The truck, the crying, the police, the social worker. It was all a script. Yes, Elliot said. It was premeditated malice. And now, we have it in black and white. This is not a dispute over a loan. Naomi, this is conspiracy. He leaned forward. With these texts, Stein's argument about verbal promises dissolves. You don't plot to squat in a house that was promised to you. You plot to invade a house you know you have no right to. I looked at the papers. I felt a wave of nausea, thick and heavy, rolling through my stomach. It was the physical reaction to realizing that the people who were supposed to love you were actually your enemies. But beneath the nausea, there was something else. Relief. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the bad daughter. I was the target, and targets can shoot back. What happens now? I asked. Now, Elliot said, closing the file. We go to court tomorrow morning, and we read these out loud. That night, the eve of the hearing, the cottage was silent. I sat at my dining room table, the same place where I had organized my first defense. The war file had grown. It was now a thick binder, organized with color-coded tabs. Tab 1, Ownership, the deed. Tab 2, Financials, the mortgage and the gift, check. Tab 3, Harassment, the police reports, the security logs of the break-in, the transcript of Ruth's voicemail. Tab 4, Malice, the text messages. I touched the pages of the text messages. Make the kids cry. I walked to the sliding glass door and looked out at the ocean. The moon was painting a silver path on the black water. The waves crashed with a rhythmic, indifferent power. The ocean didn't care about my family. It didn't care about my mother's lies or my cousin's greed. It just existed. Strong, constant, unmovable. I needed to be the ocean. My phone buzzed on the table. It was the security app. A moth had flown past the camera on the back porch. I glanced at the screen. saw the empty deck, and felt a strange calm. Tomorrow, I would have to walk into a room full of strangers. I would have to sit across from my mother and father. I would have to look Lena in the eye. I would have to listen to their lawyer paint me as a monster. But I had the binder. I had the truth. I turned off the kitchen light. The darkness was no longer terrifying. It was just the absence of light, and I knew exactly where the switches were. "Let's finish this," I said to the empty house. I went upstairs and laid out my clothes for court. A navy blue suit, sharp, professional, armor. I set the alarm for 6 in the morning. I lay down, and for the first time in a month, I didn't stare at the ceiling wondering if I was doing the right thing. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the waves carry me into a sleep that was deep, dreamless, and absolutely necessary. The time for feeling was over. The time for judgment had arrived. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. It was a windowless box of pale wood and fluorescent lights in the basement of the Bay Ridge County Courthouse, smelling faintly of floor wax and anxiety. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Elliot. My hands were folded in my lap, knuckles white, but perfectly still. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was a study in chaotic energy. Harold Stein, their lawyer, was frantically shuffling papers that looked like they had been pulled from a messy briefcase moments ago. Ruth sat next to him, dabbing at dry eyes with a crumpled tissue, while Gerald stared at the ceiling as if counting the tiles. Lena was chewing a fingernail, her leg bouncing so hard it was shaking the heavy oak table. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice booming in the small space. Judge Sterling entered. He was a man with a face carved from granite and eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human foolishness Bay Ridge had to offer. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the docket. "Matter of Hunt versus Cole and Morrow," he read. "Petition for civil no-contact order and damages. Let's proceed." Ruth didn't wait for her lawyer. She stood up immediately, her voice trembling with a vibrato that I recognized from 1,000 guilt-trip phone calls. "Your Honor, if I may," she began, clutching her chest. "This whole thing is a misunderstanding, a tragedy, really. We are a close family. I love my daughter. We had agreements, promises made over the kitchen table, that this house was for all of us. I am just a mother trying to help my struggling niece, to be dragged here by my own flesh and blood." She let out a sob, looking around the room for sympathy. Judge Sterling didn't look up from his file. "Mrs. Cole, sit down. You will speak when your counsel calls you. And we are not here for speeches about family values. We are here to discuss legal rights to a property at 412 Ocean Drive. Mr. Harmon, call your first witness." Elliot stood up. He was calm, methodical, a stark contrast to the histrionics on the other side. "Your Honor, we intend to prove a pattern of harassment, attempted illegal entry, and malicious prosecution. We will start with the timeline." Elliot walked the court through the last 10 days. He presented the police report from the first incident with the moving truck. He presented the invoice from the locksmith. He presented the unfounded letter from the Department of Social Services. Then he dropped the hammer. "Your Honor," Elliot said, walking to the bench with the staple-bound packet of text messages, "the defense has argued that their attempted move-in was based on a good-faith belief that they had permission. We have evidence to the contrary. We have communications between the defendants detailing a conspiracy to establish tenancy by force and manipulation." Harold Stein stood up. "Objection? Relevance?" "Goes to intent," Judge Sterling said, taking the packet. "Overruled." The room went silent as the judge began to read. I watched his eyes scan the pages. I saw his eyebrows knit together. "Mr. Harmon," the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet, "are these transcripts verified?" "They were provided by the defense during discovery, Your Honor." Judge Sterling looked over his glasses at Ruth. Then he looked at the paper again. "I am reading a text from a contact labeled Mom sent to Lena on August 24th, the judge read aloud. It says, "Make the kids cry. If Tyler and Ava are crying, the police will hesitate. No officer wants to drag a crying child out of a home." A gasp went through the room. It didn't come from me. It came from the court reporter, even the bailiff, who stood by the door with his arms crossed, raised an eyebrow and shifted his weight, looking at Ruth with undisguised disgust. Ruth shrank into her chair. For the first time, she couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "And another," the judge continued, his voice hardening. "Once we are in for a month, she has to formally evict us. We will have tenant rights." The judge lowered the paper. "This does not sound like a misunderstanding. Mr. Stein, this sounds like a heist." Stein loosened his tie. "Your Honor, people say things in the heat of the moment. It was venting." "We will see," the judge said. Elliot called Caroline to the stand. My neighbor looked elegant and fierce in her Sunday best. She didn't waver. "I saw the truck," Caroline testified clearly. "I heard Mrs. Cole tell the mailman, 'This is our house now,' and on the following Tuesday, I saw a woman I recognize as the defendant, Lina Morrow, using a tool to pry at the back sliding door of Ms. Hunt's home. When I yelled, she ran to a car and fled." "Objection," Stein shouted. "The witness admitted she didn't see the face clearly." "I saw the car," Caroline shot back, "and I saw the hoodie, and I know what I saw." Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand. I sat down. I looked at my mother. She looked small, defeated, but her eyes were still hard, filled with a burning resentment that I hadn't bowed down. "Ms. Hunt," Elliot asked gently, "what do you want from this court today?" I took a deep breath. I thought about screaming. I thought about demanding an apology, but I realized I didn't need their apology. I needed their absence. "I don't want to punish them," I said, my voice steady, carrying to the back of the room. "I don't want them in jail. I just want to be safe. I want to go to work without fearing that someone is breaking into my home. I want to sleep without wondering if Child Protective Services is going to knock on my door because my mother made a false report. I have spent my entire life being the safety net for this family. I can't do it anymore. I just want the court to enforce the word no." Stein tried to cross-examine me. He tried to bring up the $3,000. "Is it not true, Ms. Hunt, that you accepted money from your parents?" "I accepted a gift," I said, holding up the check image. "Marked Dream Home. If they want it back, I will write them a check for $3,000 today, but I will not trade my house for it." Stein sat down, defeated. Judge Sterling didn't retire to his chambers. He didn't need to. He stacked the papers on his desk and looked directly at the defense table. "In 20 years on the bench," Judge Sterling said, his voice filling the room, "I have seen many property disputes, but I rarely see such a calculated, malicious attempt to manipulate the legal system to harass a family member." He looked at Ruth. "Mrs. Cole, instructing a mother to use her children's tears as a shield against law enforcement is reprehensible. Filing a false report with social services is not venting. It is a weapon, and this court will not allow it." "I rule in favor of the plaintiff," the judge announced. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. "I am granting a permanent civil no-contact order. Ruth Cole, Gerald Cole, and Lina Morrow are hereby prohibited from contacting Naomi Hunt by phone, email, text, or third party. You are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of her residence at Sable Point or her place of employment. You are prohibited from posting about her on social media." Ruth gasped. "But she is my daughter." "Not today she isn't," the judge snapped. "Today, she is the plaintiff, and you are the defendant. If you violate this order, you will be arrested. Do you understand?" Ruth nodded, tears streaming down her face, real tears, this time, of shock. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I am awarding the plaintiff damages in the amount of $4,800 to cover the cost of the security system installation and legal filing fees. You have 30 days to remit payment." Case closed. The gavel banged again. I sat there for a moment, letting the words wash over me. Permanent. 500 feet. Case closed. Elliot touched my arm. "We did it, Naomi." I stood up. My legs felt light. The bailiff moved to the defense table. "Let's go, folks," he said to my family. "Clear the courtroom. I watched them stand up. Lena looked furious, whispering something to Stein. Gerald looked resigned. Ruth passed by me on her way to the aisle. She stopped for a fraction of a second. She didn't look at me, but she leaned in, her voice a poisonous hiss. "You will be lonely," she whispered. "You will die alone in that house." "Move along, ma'am," the bailiff barked, stepping between us. I watched her walk away. "No," I whispered to her, retreating back. "I will be free." I walked out of the courthouse with Elliot. We pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped out into the afternoon. The air was salty and fresh. The sun was blindingly bright, reflecting off the white concrete. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened the security app. I looked at the live feed of my front porch. It was empty. The shadows of the palm trees were swaying gently on the floorboards. The door was closed. The lock was secure. There was no truck in the driveway, no screaming on the lawn, no pounding on the door. For the first time in 33 years, the silence didn't feel like waiting for the other shoe to drop. It felt like ownership. I looked at Elliot and smiled. "I am going to go home now." "Go home, Naomi," he said. "It is all yours." I walked toward my car, the keys jingling in my hand, ready to drive back to the sound of the ocean, where the only thing that would ever cross my threshold again was the people I invited in. The war was over, and I was the last one standing. Thank you so much for listening to this story of boundaries and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop your location in the comments so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing Naomi take her power back, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help us share more satisfying stories with the world.